For the flat panel, we're going to use Photoshop to do the merge. I think Photoshop is probably the tool that is, most widely available to most photographers. So um, let's show what we can do for a flat panel inside of Photoshop.
Right. We'll go ahead and bring those in. And let's make this a little bigger so we can see what we're doing. And I like to go through and take a look in there. Let's see, let's move them in a little bit, zoom in. Well, I guess we don't need to worry about zooming in. I just want to check the files. They look pretty good. So the next thing is to automate photo merge. So you go to the file drop-down window, automate, and photo merge, and click. Now you have some options here. They need to be examined and selected. So in this particular case, I'm going to select spherical. I'd like a spherical rendition. You also have cylindrical and perspective. Now perspective is more of a planar, which you can use for narrow, let's say less than 90-degree angle panoramas. But if you get beyond 90 degrees of width, planar does too much distortion to the image, so it's better to select cylindrical or spherical. We want to add the open files and choose vignette removal. Almost every camera, actually every lens, has some vignetting, and that of course darkens the corners a little bit. And for stitching, it's a good idea to remove that. So let's click OK and let Photoshop do its thing.
I had a question here from one of the viewers that asked, where is the step where you can edit and view the HDR before saving that? I mean, he's asking, how do you know what it looks
Oh,
right?
sure. Yeah, good. Really good question.
Now, we skipped over that because again, we're showing the batch processing functionality for specifically for the panorama. But if you go into HDR Expose 3 and you get the startup screen, you'll see the line that says merge or create new HDR image. So you can take one of the panels from the panorama and merge that as a test run and take a look at it and adjust the with the user interface with the control tools. You can adjust the tone mapping parameters or try out the different presets on that image in live view. And then if you create a custom preset, you want to save that preset. And when you're working in the batch mode, you're kind of working blind. So you want to experiment a little, get your workflow down, and then when you have the presets that you like, you can go ahead and do that in the batch mode. Now there is another option which we didn't show here, but I have a tutorial on the website that shows in general how to do batch processing, where you can apply different presets to in the batch process step at the same time. So you can apply up to 5 different presets for your batch processing images, and it'll save out 5 different TIFF files for each one. We didn't show that as part of this demonstration just because it's going to clutter it a little bit too much. But all of that documentation is online on our website on the tutorials webpage. So now we have the stitch panel here in Photoshop, Richard, and I can see
Yep.
you disregarded the first rule of photography, which was never shoot directly into the sunlight, right?
Well, that's the beauty of HDR, is that I can do these type of shots where in the past, if it was filmed, forget it. I couldn't do it. In the old days, of course, you had to have that filter holder and then the graduated neutral density filters, which always created an awful image. But that's what we had to do. nowadays, with this high dynamic range possibility, it opens up, I would say, 50% of the image possibilities that you just couldn't do before.
Right. So now, what would you do? What's your next step here? You'd probably crop this, right?
Well, yeah, I would, but excuse me. The first thing I actually, I like to take a look at
Okay,
how Photoshop does the stitching, because what
that's
it
interesting.
does is it looks it looks where the elements line up. So if there's a branch or a shoreline or a mountain skyline, it's looking, well, where does it line up with these two images that we're stitching together, these 5 images? And it's kind of fun to see how it selects that stuff. And it's pretty amazing to me. Now you notice there's little dotted lines here. As soon as you flatten the image, um, let's flatten it, make one layer. So now we have one background layer, and those went away. You can see where the software warped the images so that the elements match. Cameras shoot planar images for the most part, and they have to be converted into a spherical form in order to have things line up. So all of the images are warped to some degree.
But
And
we
then
have
the next thing is to crop.
so go ahead and crop. So what we had again the HDR treatment here. We treated all of the elements of this image the same, just as it looked like when you were standing there taking the photograph. You weren't in your mind you weren't going and necessarily breaking it up into individual panels. Um, so
Yeah, right.
all of the parameters are applied uniformly, and that's why we have, no no seams in the image.
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, when I showed the grid that I put on the back of my ground glass to compose images on the VPAN film camera, uh, Photoshop has this nice rule of thirds, which is an approximation of the golden mean lines. Golden mean lines are actually a little tighter. So, the intersections on the golden mean would be about here, and
Right.
about here, and about here. So, but this is helpful.
I just
As you
had
can
a
see.
question here from a viewer that asked if you
Mhm.
have any preferred aspect ratio for your panos, or are you does it really
Yeah,
depend on? I mean, I know you do panos for for commercial work. I
right,
assume you often get, like, if you're doing a billboard or something, or decorative art, wall art or
right,
something like that, that you get sizes that you have to try and match.
right.
But do you have
Yeah,
a
exactly.
particular aspect ratio that you prefer?
Well, yeah, 3 to 1.
3 to 1.
3 to 1 is a sort of the standard for commercial panos, and it really comes from the old 617 cameras, the Fuji and the Linhof cameras, approximately 3 to 1 ratio, and that's become somewhat the standard. Uh, however, if you have a scene that requires a different aspect ratio, go for it, because you as the artist, you're the photographer, you're the artist, you decide the aspect ratio. Uh, One of the things that I'll do oftentimes is, if I'm shooting a digital panorama, I will shoot a lot more than I think I'm going to use at the end. In other words, I want more. If I'm thinking it's going to be 90 degrees, I'll shoot 135 or 180, uh, and then that allows me to do the final composition later. Couldn't really do that with film without losing a lot of resolution, but it works really well with digital. Now you can see that got a little problem here, but it's not a big problem. Let's select that little area there. Shift delete. Content aware fill.
That's
Thank you,
pretty
Phil.
easy.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. And select, deselect, Command D.
So now,
And mhm,
Richard, we should probably just move along, do a quick correction on this, because you mentioned,
yeah,
the when you're setting the final tonal adjustments and contrast and stuff on the images, you want to do that when at the very end. So your presets that you use give you a little bit of a little flatter result, because you don't want to over sharpen or over put in too much contrast, because it's kind of like cooking and adding salt. You can always add a little bit to it at the end, but if you dump too much salt in the beginning, it's hard to get that out
Yeah, I have very little luck removing the salt.
again.
But you're absolutely right. You always want to start. Filmmakers, for example, will shoot these really flat, flat type images. If you're using an Aeroflex camera, like the Alexa, for example, it does something called log. It's a very flat-looking image. It's that way intentional. It doesn't look presentable, and it's a little flat, kind of like this, only not even more flat. But it allows you to have to add uh, as needed contrast and toning. So let's see what we can do. Now, we've got a 16-bit image here now. I want to take this just for fun and go into HDR, or rather Unified Color 32-bit float. So I've converted it back into a 32-bit image.
This is our Photoshop plugin for doing HDR tone mapping. And you're just going to use this now to do a little veil and glare correction and add a little bit more detail, right?
Exactly. Let's go into the veil and glare. Veil and glare is a unique feature to Unified Color software, and John could probably explain it better than I can. But when you're creating an image with this incredible dynamic range, you get little reflections inside the elements of the lens, and it creates kind of a little bit of a fogging effect. By removing some of that veil and glare, you can snap up the image a little bit. Is that a good explanation, John?
That's as good as we have time for right now. I have a tutorial
Yeah.
on that on the website as well. So
Yeah, so let's remove some of that veil and glare, and you can see immediately that that really helps the image.
and it particularly recovers some of your shadow contrast.
Exactly.
And in scenes like this, when you're at high altitude and stuff, you'll tend to notice that even more.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've talked about the importance of using a uniform color temperature. If you're shooting for panoramas, you want to make sure that your camera is in Kelvin mode or K mode, and pick a color temperature. Now, as John mentioned, if you're in the mountains, this time of day, your color temperature is going to be about 6,500 degrees Kelvin, and you can use whatever you want if you're shooting raw, but when you're processing that image, you want to keep that in mind. Now, I think I kind of rendered this a little too warm, but I corrected that
let's
in my
just polish
preset.
this off. I think we need to skip on to the VR one too. So just go ahead and make your final adjustments to contrast and detail.
And so 32-bit float can come in very handy when you're processing a panorama.
Great. Let's go into the immersive panorama.
Oh, okay. Now these are the tips to stitch. And I created these the same way. It's the same process. We don't need to go through all those steps again.
Can you
now I
just
have
preview them, select them, and hit the space bar so we can see what we're
sure.
with? So these were created the same way in HDR Expose 3, but for this particular scene, you had, was it 7 exposure brackets for each frame?
Yeah, it was so bright outside that in order to capture the full dynamic range, I had to use 7 brackets per panel, 2 steps apart. And again, the only way to do that with a Canon camera without touching the camera is to use the ProMote control, which is godsend. Oh, here you can see my tripod setup. When I do the
So again, these are your starting frames, and they're a
right,
little flat.
yeah,
But
they're a little
we have the
flat. Again,
basic
that's intentional.
tone mapping done there. So now you're going to use a different application that is designed for doing the 360 immersive
right. And this, again,
tool.
is not the only application. There are a couple applications out there that are very popular. Probably the most popular is PT GUI. And I think PT GUI is, right out of the box, gives a little more accurate stitching. I've been using this one for about 10 years, so I'm kind of used to its shortcomings, but it's pretty good software too. It's from a company in France called Color.
With a K.
And the reason I like it is I've just gotten used to the interface. I think it's a nice, clean interface, and it
Now,
works
this
pretty
is
quickly.
also the 360 immersive panoramas. Is that something you can do in Photoshop, or is that
Well, I have never had any success doing it in Photoshop. I think that the merge feature in Photoshop is basically for what we might call flat panos.
okay?
And so as soon as you get a render there, you want to click the edit button.
So explain what
Uh,
we're looking at now, because this
yeah,
looks
it's a little,
very strange.
it is look, well, yeah, it is. This is just a preview, and you can see all the flaws, all the warts. You see the tripod there, you see the shadows of the tripod arm, the VR drive arm, which these will disappear in the rendering.
Uh-huh.
The tripod won't. Uh, Basically, the biggest problem right now, though, is that if you notice the verticals are out of whack. Well, there's a tool to fix that here, and I'll just demonstrate that real quick because that's important. That doesn't always do this kind of weird thing with the verticals, but for the immersive ones, it tends to need a little help in this regard. So I'll just draw some lines here and try to get them in the right position. So the little yellow line, the dotted yellow line is handy. Watch the molding at the top of the windows there. Okay, that looks pretty good. A couple more will be all set here, I think. And you want to do this pretty carefully. Jeez, let's see here. Well, that's pretty close. I think let's just click OK. You'll see now it looks a little better.
Oh, that's nice. So that
Yeah,
really just warped it again.
it basically just aligned everything, as you can tell. And you can click preview here and get a preview of what the render is going to look like. Takes a few seconds, and then you can just click this button to render out your image.
Okay. Why don't we
Yeah, it
launch
depends on the
into
camera.
the Pano Tour software while we're talking about this?
You bet. Let's get out of here.
So at this point, you've saved out your what do you call it? Equirectangular.
Yeah, exactly. What comes out of the AutoPano Giga when you're doing an immersive image is what we call an equirectangular image. And so we'll take a look at that just a second here. The way I do things is a little unconventional. So I apologize if I'm not politically correct on how I do this. But this is another software. There are competing products out there. This is one made by the same folks that do AutoPano Giga. It's called Pano Pro, and I think this is 2.1. And what it allows you to do is visualize. Now this is the 180 by 360 equirectangular image. And the nice thing in here is you can move it. So you can take a look at the different areas. You'll also notice that it looks kind of normal here, except there's kind of some distortion. And then there's a lot of distortion when you get up to the top. Because basically when you get to the zenith, which is the top of the panorama, it's taking that 1 pixel and spreading it all the way across.
Hmm.
Same thing with the bottom. So this is not the final result, but it allows you to take a quick look at what you're doing.
And we should
Then,
also mention that for this type of scene, you're using a fisheye lens, right? So there's distortion built
yeah,
into it.
that's right. Not
That
that you have to, not that you have to, but a fisheye lens comes in handy for this sort of thing because it takes in normally a wider field of view, so you need less images. Now, it took about 70 images for this panorama. Let's take a look at it, though. The way it would look if you were looking at it online as part of a virtual tour.
Okay.
Now, again, the crazy thing here is that the dynamic range was so extreme with the light outside the windows and then in the shadows interior, again, requiring 7 brackets, 2 stops apart.
Seven brackets to 14 stops of dynamic range.
Right. And
bracketed.
I couldn't do that with the Canon normally without the promote control. So.
And how many individual panels made this 360?
Yeah. Well, it's a 15 millimeter Canon fisheye, and with that lens, you need 6 around.
Okay.
And then you need a vertical, and which we call a zenith, and 1 shot directly below, and that's called nadir. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, I'm probably not.
Right. So that's 56 images that were used as
right.
the source for this.
Well, I thought it was even more than that, but maybe you're right. My math is not that good. It was not my strong point in school, that's for sure. So, but as you look around, this, I want to mention what this place is here. It's a winery. It's brand new here in Ashland, Oregon. It's called the Bel Fiore Winery. I probably mispronounced that, and I apologize if I did. And I want to thank Nathan Millington, the manager of wine sales and events, for allowing me to make this panorama. As you can see, they've done a great job in here. At least I think so. And as we look around, you can see that the stitching did a pretty good job. I don't really see a lot of stitching errors here. You do have to check these things,
right,
no matter which stitching software you're using. Now, you're probably wondering, where's that tripod that I talked about? Well, it's no longer here. And the reason why is after I finished doing the 6 around, I did actually 2 up. So I pointed the camera up and then turned it 45 degrees to make sure I had good coverage. And then you point the camera down and do the same thing. But you then have the tripod. So when you're finished with all of that stuff, you move the tripod out of the way and do a couple of handheld shots so that you can put that, remove the tripod. Now, what a lot of people do, just to shortcut that, is they'll put their business logo. If they're a photographer that specializes in VRs, it'll say Richard Sisk VR photography, and with the website and that sort of thing. But does anybody have any questions about this process?
So,
John, did you have any questions?
You can zoom in and you can go around and you see you've got a really nice balance now between the interior exposure and the exterior.
Yeah.
I'm going to mute myself here for a moment because I apologize for the phone.
That's all right. Well, let me just talk for a moment about the color temperature issues that I had. Again, the variation was extreme because the tungsten lighting inside measured at 2650 Kelvin and 10 magenta for a correction. And then outside was 5530 Kelvin. And it was asking for a 4 green, which is really minor. So I had to evaluate this. You have to interpret these tools. So for example, yes, those lights are 2650 Kelvin, but we've got a lot of daylight streaming in through the windows that's affecting the rendition of this scene. So I wound up using 32 Kelvin to process the panorama. Now, by using 32 Kelvin, the outside part of the scene was very blue. And the way I corrected that was once I had rendered the equirectangular TIFF, I brought it into Photoshop and used a plugin. It's a Google Nick plugin called Vivesa. I selected, using the control point technology, the areas outside the windows and just increased the warmth slider and gave it a little more contrast. And so I was able to reduce that bluish cast and get a fairly nice rendition. At least I'm pretty happy with it. What do you think, John?
I think it looks great. Um, the exterior is a little bright, but I think that, I mean, and you can obviously,
Mm-hmm.
you could tone map for that differently, but I like the fact it's natural looking, and you have, the different brightness as you pan through it, looking in the different directions to where the sun is, and obviously the warmth and everything is on the interior, which is really nice. I think the winery would be really proud for this, to have this for a virtual tour. Now, you would save this out as what is the final package called? Because there's the export feature.
Well, once you go through and you make your selections here, because you have a bunch of options, you can use this geolocation, and it will create a a little map showing where the location is where you were shooting. You can add a bunch of different things in here that make your experience for the viewer of your virtual tour quite interesting. So, for example, normally something like this is part of a virtual tour that may contain, let's say, 5 or 6 images. And in this case, you might, well, let's see, let's go back to this one. Let's say with your virtual tour, you wanted a shot outside here so you could see the vineyards.
Right.
So you might put a button here, and the viewer would be able to click the button and take you immediately to another 360 outside. And then you might want to have, for example, a button on this door, which would take you to the wine processing facility.
Just show me where the cellar is, and I
Well,
want to see the
yeah,
wine cellar.
this place is something else. I'll tell you, I was so excited to go out there and have the opportunity. And again, I want to thank the folks out there, Nathan Millington and the other employees out there who were so gracious in accommodating me. And
That's great.
it was a whole lot of fun. I'll tell you, I'll be going out there again, I'm sure, just to buy some wine.
Yeah,
And
no, that's
so
a
thank you.
beautiful
And show,
venue and a great example of this technology. We had one more question regarding AutoPano versus Pano Tour. Now,
right,
AutoPano will only create the panorama, so in this case, the equirectangular view, right?
right.
And
And
you
if
could
all you
also
want to do is
you
take a
could
look
also
at it on
use
your own
use
computer, you don't necessarily need to have Panatour Pro. If you're building these tours, if you want to do it as part of your business, if you're a professional, you do need some type of software to create what we call the build.
hmm,
And once you go through and you select the options that you want, so for example, you can add the calendar, or not calendar, what is it? It's the
compass.
compass directions. You can add that, and you can add the geolocation. You can add the little planet view opening if you want to. There are a bunch of other features in here, including audio. Give you an example of that. Let me close this because I think
We're getting close to the
uh,
end of the time, but if you can pull up
yeah,
that
we are, I know.
the Grand Canyon shot that you have
Yeah, maybe
in
we could take time to do that.
your
Um,
narration, because that's kind of neat. It kind of shows all of the.
yeah, that would be a good way to end the webinar, I think, John.
Yeah. And while we're doing that, folks, while Richard is setting this up, if you have any more questions, please type them in, and we'll try to answer them before we sign off. The webinar will be
The
available.
aliens are landing, John.
Yeah, this is kind of neat. So this is the Grand Canyon, right?
This is a really amazing spot on the north rim of the Grand Canyon called Torowheat Point. And you'll see that it's one of the few places where you can look directly down 3,000 feet and see the Colorado River below you.
And
There are
directly into the
incredible
sun.
views in every direction here. It's definitely worth a visit. Let's go to a full screen view of this. The wonders of the Grand Canyon cannot be adequately represented in symbols of speech.
So you're playing the audio over your speakers. It's not coming through, but you did do an audio narration on this.
Swelling in floods of music when the storm gods play upon the rocks, and fading away in soft.
This is really spectacular. Where was this, Richard?
Yeah, just a second. Let me turn off the annoying soundtrack. This is, again, Torowee Point. You go to a little town called Fredonia, Utah. There's only one light in town. And you go west on the road for about 7 miles. Keep your eye peeled for a small sign on the left-hand side. There's a dirt road that continues on for about 60 miles. You want to have a Jeep or other high clearance vehicle. You want to make sure you have good tires and a good spare, because
you don't want to
most of the time you get a flat one way or the other. The volcanic rock there is just brutal on tires.
I'm just looking at
you want to get there. They have a nice campground, but they have no facilities. I'm sorry, John?
So I'm just looking at this is spinning through. I'm looking at the contrast on this particular scene, and this is something that you really never could have managed in the film days. You're looking straight down to the river, and then behind you is the sun. I mean, this is amazing.
That's exactly right. There's no way you could do this with a film camera. Let's whoopsie, get a little dizzy sometimes doing this, but
okay.
Another thing you can do when you're in Panotour is you can limit the amount of plus or minus. You can adjust that. If you want it to not go past 100%,
right,
you can select that.
Well, that's I mean, that's probably the subject of a whole different software tutorial that I'll let the folks at Color arrange. But I want to thank you, Richard. We're getting to the end of our time. We've actually gone over a little bit. I had one question here. Somebody asked about how you handle clouds and water and other movement. That's part of the stitching process. And when Richard took the static static images for the winery, he had the checkbox checked for merge static photos. And when you do that, the deghosting and the alignment portions are disabled. If you uncheck that, then our deghosting algorithms will kick in, and then that will clear up any movement that there is. If there's a bird flying through the scene, or if there's a water movement or clouds, the deghosting functionality of HDR Expose is a very powerful feature and can compensate for that. Again, we have more tutorials on that on our website, so please check back to our website, unifiedcolor.com, and you'll see the tutorials tab, and then you can go into a lot of these other features and functionality of the software in greater detail. For this presentation, for this particular webinar, we really wanted to focus on Pano Prep Batch Processing feature inside of Expose 3.1. So I think that's it, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending. We had a good turnout today, and it's always fun to do this. Richard, thank you so much for all your effort and the great photography, and especially I want to thank you for your help and insight in sharing your pains and frustration of the process as it was, and helping us really create a tool that that talks to all of those things and creates a more unified workflow for you.
John, I want to also thank you for inviting me here today, and also thank all of the participants.
Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar.